Hi everybody. In this video, let's take a look at some more tips and tricks for Twinmotion users. These tips should be useful for complete beginners in Twinmotion and hopefully will be useful for more experienced users. All right, go ahead and get into it. All right, everybody, here we are in Twinmotion, and the first thing we want to talk about is objects not displaying correctly. So for example, if we zoom in here, you'll notice two issues in particular. First thing is that the object is not really displaying correctly. And then secondly, if we actually turn on our path tracer, I'll put this on right here, you can see we're getting some pretty pronounced problems. Quite simply, the path tracer is not really sure how to display or render these objects. Now, we're using SketchUp, and this seems to be, in my experience, very much a kind of a SketchUp issue. So how do we go about fixing this? Well, let's bounce over to SketchUp. All right, everybody. So here we are in SketchUp, and you can see I've got our two objects here. Now, the first thing that we'll want to do is preferably, I'm going to move myself out of the way here, make sure that we're working in one of the fast rendering styles. So go to styles over here, and I'm going to look for basically the interior design style. Now this should work nicely. The reason we're going to do this is we're going to explode these objects, and SketchUp doesn't do the best job when it comes to displaying in real time very complicated objects. So if you put on the fast modeling style, it will speed up performance quite a bit. And what I'm going to do is explode this all the way down pretty much as low as I can. And I'm going to make sure that as I do this, it's probably good to hide everything else in your scene, and I'm going to completely explode this object. Now, this might take a second depending on the complexity of the object, so I'm going to pause, and when I come back, this should be fully exploded. Now that my object is completely exploded, let's hit the Datasmith again. We're going to re-export this, and we'll take a look at this in Twinmotion, and we'll make sure just to refresh here. And if I hit the path tracer, you can see now I'm not getting those dark patches. Now, we're still getting them over here on the right. So what else can we do? Well, other than exploding this object, we can go in here, scroll all the way down to the bottom where miscellaneous is, and turn on two-sided. Now, if I hit the path tracer again, you can see this object is displaying correctly. Quite simply, a mixture of both of these techniques can work really well for objects that are just not displaying correctly. There's a couple of other options we can do as well. So we can pop in, for example, to this piece right here, and we can see that this is still in our path tracer not displaying correctly. So what we can do is manually explode this. We can also try going into this group here, do a Control-A, right-click, and reverse all the faces. Now, there's no real guarantee that this will work all the time, and sometimes when you do this, you'll see that you're getting basically faces that have no texture on them. But it's just another thing that you can try to see if it'll work. All right, everybody, moving on. The next thing I want to talk about is technically the scene graph or scene tree within Twinmotion, and this tends to be neglected very much by new users, but also more experienced users as well. But there's really a lot of great functionality in it. So let's take a quick look. I'm going to pop into this scene over here, and I'm going to just move forward through these walls, and you can see it's an interior shot with kind of a lot of decorative elements going on. How can I organize this a little bit better? Well, if I look at the scene graph or the scene tree on the right, you can see there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of objects. Now, the first thing to be mindful of is that you can minimize these collections or folders by using the little arrow button here to open or close those out. And I'm going to go and just minimize some of these a little bit. But you can see I've still got lots and lots of them. I'm using a lot of Twinmotion books in this scene, and as such, they're kind of like, you know, all over the place. The first thing we can actually do is go to the search bar, and I'm going to type book and hit enter. And now you can see I've selected all of these books. They're all highlighted. Now, what I can do then is just hold down Shift and just left click, and you can see I've got a huge pile of these books selected. And then what I can do is just right click, and I can create a new sub-container, or I can move them to a completely new container. I'm going to move to a new container, And you can see now, if we do that, we'll have the ability to minimize or hide these all in one go. And that's pretty handy. Now, this is really useful for just organizing your scene, but also for actually reducing the weight of your scene. Let's get rid of this book option here. And I'm going to just hide the rest of this content. And if I pop out of here, what I can do in order to help facilitate my scene, I'm going to decide that I want a new container for trees. So I could, technically speaking, just drop in 3 or 4 different trees here. And then I'm going to hold down Control to select these. And you can see they're highlighted on the scene tree. I can right click here and again move to a new container, and I can call that TREES, trees. And that's one way to work in this. The other thing you can do though is to actually select this trees folder, right click on it and make it the active container. Now this means that if I drag out new trees and place them into my scene, and if I look at this folder and expand it, you can see, because that was the active container, those trees have gone in there. There are a number of other really cool features about the scene graph or scene tree in Twinmotion. For example, if I find myself maybe losing complete track of my model, I can, find myself completely far away from it and maybe struggle to actually get back to where my model is supposed to be. You can, at any point, select something within the scene tree. So, for example, I'm going to select this little pig model. I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to zoom to selection. Now, it might, in that case, it puts me into my wall a little bit, but all in all, it can get you back to where you want to be. So again, right-click and just zoom to selection. And there we go, looking straight at our little pig model. Now, this will obviously be very dependent on the camera focal length and whether you've got objects in the way, but it's a really handy way to be able to zoom back to a specific object. So one of the other cool things with the scene tree is really to do with being able to add grass to specific areas. In other words, to paint or scatter on vegetation without going over the edges. So here we've got a pretty basic setup. I've got some grass and I've got some stone here. Now, if you go into populate, and for example, we go maybe to grass and flowers, and I'm going to try and maybe just paint on some of this, you can see what will happen here. It's going to just go completely over the edge, which is not really ideal. You can kind of fine-tune this a little bit. You could try brushing this on and just seeing what's going to happen. But overall, it just won't work. You're just going to go over the edges. Now, even if, for example, I select this and I right-click and I go isolate on and off, and there we go, do it twice there, and we go back to populate, and we're going to try this again, and I paint, you can see I'm still going over the edges. Now, a better way to go about doing this is to delete these. Make sure that you're in the isolate mode. I'm going to go to populate, and instead of paint, I do need to go to scatter. And you can see I've got a long grass here, and I'm going to use the scatter tool and left click and drop this in. Now, you can see the same issue. What's going on? Well, a lot of these original grasses won't respect the borders within Twinmotion. And so what we actually need to do is delete these ones. And we're going to go back to the library tab here, and we're going to go to vegetation and detail grass. Now, please note, to the best of my knowledge, detail grass does not allow you to be painted, but you can scatter it. Now, I'm going to drag out this long grass border again, and I'm going to select it, hit the scatter tool, and now you can see it is going over a little bit, but only individual strands, but not the entire grass. And you can always drag out more of these as well at the same time and scatter as well. Only thing you got to be mindful of is the poly count. Here you're like adding a lot of geometry, but this is just a wonderful way to isolate an object so you can really put some really nice vegetation. And you can see that looks really, really great. All right, everybody. The next thing I want to talk about, and hopefully the next tip that you find useful, is adjusting the grass within Twinmotion. Now, my students recently just kind of, finished up working on a very fall or autumn themed render And a part of that was making the grass look a little bit better. So how do we go about doing this? Well, I'm going to go back to the Populate tool here in Twinmotion, and I'm going to, again, just grab some regular grass. Now, for this one, we are going to use paint, and I'm going to leave the original scatter grass there. And I'm going to grab this tall grass, drag that fella in. I'm going to drag in this wild grass as well. And finally, we'll just add in maybe just a little bit of this long grass 03. Now, I am going to use the brush here and just start drawing this in. Now, I don't want my grass to look as green as this, and maybe I want to change some of the settings. I like the overall grass model, but I want to tweak it a little bit. Well, we actually can. If I move myself out of the way here and I zoom in, you can see on the scene tree or scene graph here, you have the option to select your painted vegetation. Now, I've got my scatter one here, and I've got the painted one right here. Well, how do I make this look a little bit more fall or autumnal? Well, a couple of things we can do. We can actually change each of these grasses. So in other words, even though you've painted them or scattered or painted them on, you can still go in there and tweak them. So the first thing we can do is maybe dial down how much tall grass we have. So let's drop the density here, and you can see the effect that that's going to have. We can take it all the way up or down. And that looks nice. And I can also adjust the size. Okay, this is looking pretty good. All right, let's click on the wild grass. And you can see we've got some of the same options as well. I can increase the density of this and the size. But what I want now is the details. If I click on this to open it up, you can see we've got a couple of options. Dryness, though, is what will really kind of adjust this. So you can see with a dryness of 0, it's very green. But I'm going to crank this all the way to the right. And you can see now this is looking a lot paler, a lot more washed out. And I think it looks a little bit more what you get in fall, autumn, or even going into winter. Now, the other thing we can also do on top of this, going to my long grass, open up the details as well. And I'm going to crank the dryness as well. And you can see the same effect, but we want to leave a little bit more variation here. So the next thing to do is adjust the tint. So I'm going to click on this guy here. You can see this one is actually set to almost a bluey teal. I'm going to drag this slider and I'm going to bring it into the yellows. And you can see I don't want it to be too kind of orangey, but just very pale yellow. And then what I'm going to do here is bring up the density again and increase the size. Now, the last one I am going to adjust is going to be the tall grass itself. And I'll do this similar technique. What we'll do is just drag this into kind of the yellows. And that will give it a much nicer sort of fall or kind of colder winter feel. And you can see the difference here between the original scatter grass, which is looking very green and probably too saturated, and this more autumnal or fall look that we've got going on. Now, you can also add in a few weeds and a few dandelions and things like that. That will kind of just help populate this and make it look a little bit more seasonal. And overall, I think that looks pretty good. Now, the other thing we can also do, though, to make this look a little bit better is go to the Vegetation tab, Trees, and I'm going to drop in 2 different trees here. One is going to be the turkey oak, and one is going to be the red oak. And these will look pretty nice. Now, I'm going to just change the ambience here just so we actually get the sun coming in from a different angle so we can see more light. And I'm also going to just increase the sun intensity a little bit. There we go, looks nice. Now, looking at these trees here, we can also make these look a little bit more autumnal or fall. I am going to click on the turkey oak, and you can see when we do this, we have options here as well. Now, you can use the presets, summer or autumn, to change the colors of the leaves. You can also, again, go in and adjust the leaf tint as well. So you can really adjust these to get the look you're going for. But oftentimes, it's just as easy to go in here and actually just click on the presets. And there you go. That's how we go ahead and just change the grass and really the foliage color to get more of a seasonal variation. All right, let's move on. All right, everybody. Moving on, next thing I want to talk about is gravity. And something that was kind of introduced in SketchUp, or sorry, in Twinmotion a little while ago, but then sort of kind of forgotten about. And so let's just take a quick look at this. So right now I have a pretty basic scene. Let me go ahead and scale down this enormous coffee bean. I just want to show you really quickly. So I'm using two Sketchfab models here, this really cool coffee grinder, and that is from Mateusz Wolinski. Really, really nice Sketchfab model. And I'm also using this low poly coffee bean from Skrita. Again, these are from Sketchfab, available in Twinmotion just by going to the Sketchfab tab. Now, I've got my nice little coffee bean here. I'm going to just lift this guy up, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit more on this, and I am going to scale this down. And I'm actually going to scale it down pretty low. Now, what I'm going to do then is just holding down Shift, I'm going to tap and just drag a little duplicate here. And this guy is going to be an instance, and I'm going to say, let's just do 10. And click OK. And you can see they're all highlighted over here on my scene tree. Okay, and with all of them highlighted, I am just going to make sure by selecting them in the scene tree, and I'm just going to move these down a little bit. I think that looks good. I want to get them kind of close to the table. I don't want them to like bounce all the way through. Okay, and then I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm going to drag out another vertical duplicate, and I'm pretty happy with just making this really just do a copy. And then I'm going to do this like a whole bunch of times here. Now, I'll try and do this really quickly. Just going to make kind of these nice little copies and duplicates, and we're trying to get a nice sort of random scattering of these little beans. Okay, that looks pretty nice. Over here on the right, if I just clear out my scene tree and I scroll all the way up to the top here, you can kind of see I've got a ton of these low poly coffee beans. So I've got them kind of all selected here. I am going to drag them into this little container, and we can toggle them on and off. But all in all, this looks pretty good. Now, what I need to do is go up here to the top, and by default, this is kind of hidden away. Normally, this little section is going to look just like this, but if you expand it, you can see we've got some options. Now, we can turn on gravity right here. I'm going to click on that, and you can see these little guys are going to bounce right down. Now, the other thing is, as I keep left-clicking on these, more and more of them are just going to start falling. Now, to some degree, you might notice they will kind of fall through the furniture a little bit, and this is, I think, partially just that work-in-progress element. And so, you can see, all in all, though, look at that. I think it's just so very, very cool. Now, there is, however, kind of maybe a bit of a difference between useful and really, really cool, but I still think this is just so absolutely wonderful. And you can just keep dropping these down. Now, if you find that they kind of bounce through a little bit, I think you can go ahead and put maybe a plane under these, which Twinmotion will recognize as an actual thing. Now, the other thing is we can also, again, I'm going to select all of these guys, and I am going to just lift up some more. And I'm going to turn off, make sure everything else is off, just lift up these ones that kind of fell. And we can also now turn on the move with collision and kind of drop as well. And you can see, hopefully, that'll work a little bit better. All in all, it's just really, really cool. Now, one function of this is to drop objects onto the ground plane and have them fall realistically. Now, I've never really used this, and I'm not really sure that you would either. But either way, this just looks really, really great. It gives a wonderful sense of organic movement and life to your objects. And I think that if you were to try and actually scatter these objects by hand, you probably wouldn't really have the best result. All right, everybody, moving on. The next tip that I want to give you or to talk about is the use of HDRI lighting environments. Now, a lot of people are pretty comfortable with this. It's pretty basic to set up a HDRI lighting environment. All we have to do is make sure we are signed into our account, go to skies, pick kind of the atmosphere that we're looking for, and drag it into your scene. Now, you'll notice obviously the lighting changes, but this is not really what I'm focused on with this kind of point. More specifically, it's that a lot of users, myself included, generally don't enable the backdrop HDRI. Now, let's take a look at this and I'll show you why it's really, really cool. For a lot of ArcViz people, the cardinal sin is leaving the horizon line open and obvious. Really nothing says that this is not realistic, quite like seeing this sort of kind of infinite horizon line. And so what we can try doing is maybe place trees, for example, out here, or bushes, or take a photograph and place it outside. Now, if you want to do that effect, but you also want to keep the HDRI lighting environment, it can be a little bit problematic because putting a plane in front or outside of your windows is going to block a lot of light coming in. Now, one way we can get around this is the use of the backdrop HDRI. And I think a lot of users found when this was first brought into Twinmotion, if memory serves, the backdrop HDRI was kind of static. You could place it in your scene, but you couldn't really do anything with it. And it sort of just didn't really work very well. Now, that has changed quite a bit recently. And so what I'm going to do here is click on the backdrop HDRI. Now, you can see here what we have is a sort of HDRI lighting environment. It is a pseudo sphere. So it is spherical, it's wrapped around 360, and then actually flattened on the bottom here. Now, I think this is really, really, really cool for a couple of reasons. One, if we do go to library, HDRI lighting environment, and we go outdoor, you can see we actually have quite a lot of different options. And because these have an actual floor, you no longer necessarily have to worry about how to integrate your interior scenes with your exterior. In other words, the gap between them becomes a lot more seamless. Now, this is really, really cool. We also have a couple of options here. The intensity is going to be very comparable to the intensity that you're going to get if you use the Sky Dome. Now, you can also rotate these as well. But if we click on the Details tab, you can see we've got some really, really great options here. We can really adjust almost the directionality, if you will, of the pseudo-sphere HDRI environment. And so we can do things like adjust the size, we can take it up larger or smaller, and we can also adjust the height offset, basically where is the imaginary ground plane. And this can be really useful for integrating your shot into an actual environment. We can also tilt, although I've never really found any particular use for this, but it's just really, really cool that you can do that. And the projection offset will do exactly what you see there. It's going to lift up almost like the horizon line of the HDRI image. And all in all, it's really, really nice. One other feature that I want to mention with this that I kind of feel like a lot of people don't really acknowledge, and I think it's really, really cool, is that you can actually go over here to the HDRI preview, click on the three dots, and go open. So this is an 8K HDRI that I downloaded from Polyhaven. Thank you again, Polyhaven, for making so many of these really amazing HDRIs available for free. Now, these ones you might have to fine-tune a little bit more. If we pop outside, you can see it looks pretty okay, but if you adjust the height offset, you may run into some very kind of interesting issues, and especially if we're kind of adjusting this here as well. You can kind of see, there we go, that's what I'm talking about. Now, all in all though, still, this is just incredible. It opens up even more dynamic options for your lighting. Consider that these will also take on weather effects as well, and you can see this is just really, really cool. All right, let's move on. But before we do that, I would recommend maybe taking a look at using the backdrop HDRI to light your scenes going forward instead of just utilizing the Sky Dome. And I absolutely have made that mistake. But going forward, I think the backdrop HDRI is the way to go. All right, everybody. The next thing I want to talk about is actually the add to a local function. So here you can see we have a chair model from SketchUp. Now, I haven't really gone in there and tweaked anything about this, but theoretically, if you do this right, you've probably gone in and added the materials you want to it. You've also maybe checked that it renders correctly in the path tracer, and if you need to, you can always go back up to the top here where we've got this little hidden toolbar, and we can click on the reset pivot or the center pivot options. And this will allow you to basically make sure that when you're moving this object as a whole, that it's actually moving correctly. Now, once you get it looking in a spot that you like, all we have to do is just go up here to the scene tree, right click, and we should probably name this so we could rename it maybe something like whatever chair or whatever it is that we want. But more specifically, we can go to add to user library. And so by doing that, you'll see nothing has changed. However, if we go File, New Scene, and we do a completely new scene here, and we go to our Library tab, and we go to User Library, you can see now we have, in fact, added this object right into our user library. And this means that effectively anything that you really like and you like the look of, or you plan on utilizing a lot, just save it to the user library. Now, the only caveat I've noticed with this is that I do not think that the user libraries travel over from one version of Twinmotion to another. So you might have to kind of effectively either copy and paste that folder from the old version into the newer version, or just kind of keep in a state of updating your library. But the cool thing about this is you can then bring in models from really Blender or 3D Studio Max through FBX, assign all the correct materials, and then just add it to your user library. Okay, with that being said, I am going to go ahead and leave it there for today. If you made it to the end of the video, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers!